The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, the group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I am geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Kīlauea and Maunaloa volcano update today, August 5th, 2021. The big news this past week on the island has actually been our largest wildfire in at least 50 years, so we'll talk about that a little bit, but first we'll talk about the volcanoes and their monitoring signals, and we will tie it all together for you guys, and as well as review the most recent Volcano Watch and other publications that came out. So kind of a crazy week in a non-volcanic way. What do you think, Dane? How's the last week been for you?
Yeah, busy. That fire that started up on Mauna Road quickly descended towards residential areas and started to get real hectic really quickly. Driven by the winds, there were some gale force wind warnings. We'll go through some details about that fire, but yeah, crazy and busy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and not to mention it was Dane's birthday last week, so happy birthday, Dane.
Thank you.
Dane will be manning our chats and their streams. Let us know if you have any issues with the sound or anything like that, and he'll answer any questions he can, and also collect questions that we will discuss live at our breaking point partway through our show, and then at the very end of our broadcast as well. So to start things off, we'll talk about Kilauea here. This is the most recent images from Kilauea, courtesy of the USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And this is an image taken looking down at that downdropped area in the caldera from the edge of it on the caldera floor there. So this is a nice view to open our scene here today. And that's part of their gas survey that we discussed last week. And here's another image of them as they approach the bottom of that Hale Trail below Volcano House in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. That may be familiar to the locals around here that use that trail, or perhaps have eaten on that little bench there. So you can't really go across the Caldera on this trail anymore here, but you can connect over to the Kīlauea Trail area there. So here we see the gas scientists calibrating the instruments before they march them across the Caldera there to sample. So pretty cool. Zoom way in here for Dane's benefit. See if you can see all the various components in there. Maybe save that.
Doing this again.
Save that for a future breakdown. There you go. Looks like the HBO geologist could use a new iPhone
right.
protector or screen or something there, or maybe that's on purpose.
Right.
So that's the
interesting.
Yeah, it's like there's all kinds of components in there, which would be interesting. But perhaps someday they'll explain them to us.
Those boxes look expensive.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, high-tech stuff there. Mahalo USGS for sharing a little insight into your equipment there. Here's a view from a couple of days later when they were doing regular routine monitoring and perhaps flying over, walking over, measuring things. Here's that view from that south side of the Caldera once again. Nothing really different there. It's just another view of it not being different. Perhaps document that. And focusing in closer to that inactive western fissure, you really can see there. Maybe this is worth me clicking through to blow it up for you guys, so you can really see how it's quite crumbly here on the edges. Quite a lot of the material is that was not very coherent, right? It wasn't stuck together very well. It was just globs of lava that had piled one on the other. It's kind of crumbling down from vibrations or tilting of the ground or just weathering wind and rain and that kind of thing. So that's interesting to see. But those are the kind of minor changes, nuanced changes we have going on here. Looking at our thermal image, no real change there. I would show you the animation, but except it's all flickery and it perhaps induce seizures, which we're trying to avoid here. So not a whole lot of change in the temperature there. A little more interesting is the actual depth graph here for Halema'uma'u. So you can see this is the past month of depth measured at that one specific spot close to that west vent area. And it's had this long-term trend of going down, and we're ignoring all those daily variations up and down there. And you can see it went a little bit faster, and it seemed like it could drop down, and then now it looks like it came back up, and perhaps it's wiggling back down again a little bit here. Maybe I can zoom that in so you guys can see it a little more closely. A little bit something like this, right? It's not quite clear if it drops down or what happens there, and then pops up or exactly what's going on there, but it's something a little more interesting than we've seen in the past, and it's not clear if this is due to some subsurface adjustment of that old lava that was ponded, right, now encased magma underneath that crust, or if it's something to do with a whole volcanic surface swelling. The whole summit area has been inflating, and it could be tilting. And if it's tilting a little more from one area than the other from before, then that might induce some changes in the surface as well. And that's something interesting to look at. I showed you guys some of these historic Makaupu'i 1965 lava lake diagrams and showing different contours of subsidence over time. And for the most part, you see different areas subsiding. There's a column here that's one is for subsidence for the scale here, and then one is for uplift. And in this panout, there's no uplift right there. You can see. So you can see that most periods don't have any uplift. They're just different degrees of subsidence. But there are times like this one in late December to early part of 1966, where there were east rift zone eruptions, and you did see tilting not just of the lava lake, but areas outside of the lava lake were tilting away from those nearby. This is on East Rift as well, so those nearby tilt eruptions from nearby areas. So it could be something underground adjusting as well to the swelling magma below. And that's something that, in this case, it was transient and passed after maybe a year or so, but it certainly could have had longer term effects there that were interesting. So I won't spend any more time on that, but just interesting to look at that. And so on that point, we can look at the tilt of the volcano here. This is the ground tilt from the USGS for the last month, and we've stopped having these big deflation inflation events. You can just see the last one was just about a month ago now. And since what looked like it was going to be that next deflation inflation event, it's basically stayed at that lower level. One small variation here, perhaps a small deflation inflation. Overall, some minor variations. This one over here at the end, maybe it's trying to do deflation inflation, but it's definitely not the normal shape. There's a background inflation that's superimposed there. So overall, the pattern still is of climbing. It's hard to gauge how much through this deflation inflation. You may have a range of 0 to -6, you know, so maybe if it's at -3, let's say halfway, and we're coming over here to the right side of the graph and we're ending at the top at, this is +6. That's 9 microradians over a month. That's, you know, that's some modest inflation, but it's not huge, crazy amounts where you could have larger amounts in much shorter times, in a matter of days, rather than spread out over the whole month, right? And not to say that every eruption is going to have a large tilt signal associated with it, but it certainly can have much larger signals, and having a gradual tilt like this is kind of the new normal, per se, right, until something else changes. So no cause for alarm there, nothing really different from the last couple of weeks, honestly. So we come down to the GPS, and this is GPS over the last year. So you can see that July starts right here, and this is July to August is this last little chunk right here. So we can zoom into that and see that ever since that little wiggle that we had, where we had that shifting center to the south of the caldera of inflation, you know, really resumed the same trend, and really it's been pretty tight and steadily upwards there, and we'll see what comes here at the end. That's always the question, what comes next here. But the trend is unchanged. It seems to be holding steady in its constant state of change, where it's still changing all the time at a constant rate. It's not accelerating nor decelerating. It's just going steady, but it is changing pretty well there. So to get a handle on that, we're going to look at the earthquakes as usual. Here's a past week of earthquakes on Kilauea, the automatically generated USGS map that has a lower threshold for magnitude, which is nice to look at. And we'll look at the other map here shortly as well. But it's cool to see these patterns here. So there is our summit zone, which is showing activity focused, really, if we look closely, it's focused in that inner collapse pit area, actually, which is interesting. So perhaps some other signs of adjustment beneath that lava lake right there that could be causing some funny tilting or deformation above it, right? That's the first interesting signal we've seen in a while on that lava lake depth plot, and that could be something that could be telling in the future. We'll have to wait and see. So that's all in here. We have an adjustment to the northwest at Namakani Payo, part of the Kauiki fault zone over here, which is also normal, an adjustment as we see swelling of the summit region. We do see it kind of rub against Maunaloa. That sets off this area over here. That's normal as well. We have seen this upper East Rift Zone area continually flaring off, fairly geologically constant seismicity here, you know, delineating a pretty nice line of earthquakes going down here as well. Last week we discussed how there's a connection from that at that bend area, right, from this upper East Rift Zone, or aka East Rift connector, to the Kauai fault zone, which is shown here a little bit in the topography, and then to that southwest rift, which also has its connector and its bend going off in that direction. So we're actually seeing that upper part of the southwest rift connector, or seismic southwest rift zone, also activated and visible over the last week, a little bit more so than some previous weeks. That seems to come and go, and I'm not sure that there's any long-term consequence evident yet, but we'll see how that develops, just to know that there's an open pathway that goes apparently both into that upper southwest rift and to the upper east rift. So it seems to all be pretty well connected there right now. Right, that's the interesting thing there. And we have this blue dot is colored by depth, so this is showing a deeper zone of earthquakes. Let me scroll down here to the scale. The blue is between 20 and 40 kilometers, so that's that 30 miles down area, right? And last week we also pointed out how the ones in this area, especially to the south of the caldera, off in this area over here, southwest, are thought to be part of that one of the deeper roots of the volcanic system. So that's also ongoing still. Seems to be not nearly as much as you see closer to the surface, but that's happening as well. And then scrolling over here, we do see that there is activity in this uppermost part of the Middle East Rift Zone as far as Pu'u, or you might call it the Upper East Rift Zone as far as Pu'u. There's been some mixed terminology used there in the past. And clearly it's not vibrating nearly as much as you see this open pathway over here to the west that's connecting this upper segment. But it is still showing events, some seismicity along the rift zone trace itself, right? Kind of near the Makapui area, where we believe there is some extra larger storage area below there in the rift zone. And that's also true, we think, somewhere in a Pu'u area. Pu'u being over here, and this is Kamomoa area that was an eruption area, and I forget which year that was now, 2014, perhaps? No, 2011, perhaps. Yeah, I'll have to look back, refresh my memory on that. And a whole other year here. So, and then we also have the south flank still moving down over here, and you see that pattern of earthquakes that's mostly just south of this Upper East Rift Zone and uppermost part of the Middle East Rift Zone, or as far as Pu'u. But we also see some south flank activity a little bit further east, going this past week, mostly not as far as Kalapana, with a couple events over here farther over, right there. And for the most part, staying farther over to the west. And interesting as the whole south flank adjusts, how the magma will move through the system is what we're keeping our eye on, right? Knowing that it's more likely that it injects into areas between here and as far as Heiheahulu, which is over here. This area has all historically been an area that likes to be intruded into, more so, but also as well as this Upper East Rift, Southwest Rift, and the Kauai over here. Those are the most likely areas, right? So we'll see. And one more thing, if I can zoom in a little further, maybe it might just be the way these dots are drawn here, but maybe you see a little hint of this Upper Southwest Rift area over here starting to show some activity as well, which is also not surprising if we know that there's a weakness in the grain of the volcano there, essentially, through all that past historical context we've given you guys. That if the whole area is filling up, then it could be activating those shallower structures as well. So fascinating to look at that. That's earthquakes for the past week here. If we look at the earthquake counts, 440 is the number on the graph here. So we'll take that and show you guys the rates over the past year graph from the USGS here. So there it is, our past week, right in that 440 range right there, similar to the week before. You can see it's been variable over the past couple months or so, but more or less in this background range that's been steadily elevated post the eruption at the summit of Kīlauea, right? And so this background level is still about the same as the background level we had before. And when we had a background level before, what set us off to bigger changes were these other swarms that from that background level went even higher and higher and higher and higher there. So when we start seeing that kind of activity, we'll know we're getting closer to an eruption. We haven't seen that yet, so we're still just continuing as before until we reach that breaking point. We're not to the breaking point, not showing signs of being near the breaking point yet. Yeah, and interesting reflecting on a 2018 eruption, how they actually discussed in hindsight and analyzing the path of earthquake waves through that area near the summit, how the actual speed of the earthquakes waves changed a small amount because the volcano was so pressurized, it was transmitting that stress into the surrounding rocks, and that was affecting their properties to change the earthquake wave speed. So that's something I'd be fascinated to know if the USGS is able to monitor in closer to real time, and at some point be able to tell us, well, it looks like something like we're stressed to that point where now we really can say it's in a shorter, sooner than later kind of range, and we're still waiting for that sign. So that's kind of where we are. That's the whole past year. We can zoom into this area over here for the past month here and look at that. Here's the past month. And you can see that we had a little bit of a higher bump, but that's still only 140 earthquakes per day, or per day now instead of per week. So that doesn't really compare to what we were before. I'm kind of looking at the pattern here. Some small variations over the past month, but nothing really significant. And you can kind of look down here at this depth versus time plot and get a little sense of where these higher peaks might have come from. Maybe you have a little extra seismicity both in that deeper area, which just includes the Pahala zone as well. And certainly you see a lot more clustering in that shallow area as well. So hand in hand, you see those kind of ramp ups, and nothing really noteworthy here to point out. You can see that the trend has been, this is just kind of how it happens to be once in a while, but since we talk about it, we can point out that once in a while trends a little bit slower down in that Pahala region over the past week or so. And that follows a little bit slower up at the summit area, but it seems to be picked back up again. It's quaking as much as it has been in recent time. So that's the past month. And scroll up here, you can see what that looks like in map view for the past month, all in post-eruption filling time, and you can see how really get a longer-term view of all those structures in here that are vibrating and moving in response to magma coming into the volcano. So looking at the end of this graph here for the past month, maybe it's going up very slightly from the last week or so, but nothing alarming. We can look in a little bit more detail here at this most recent USGS earthquakes plot, showing the earthquakes. This is now colored by time rather than by depth. So the orange ones are all within the past couple of days, and those are the most recent ones. The yellow ones back to the last week is how I have it set here. So you do see those. We can zoom in a little more, which is nice, right? You can still see some more here in the summit region, and it's hard to tell exactly how accurate these are, but you see we have kind of a cloud over here east of the pit, and a little bit over here in that western connector area, and then a little bit over here near that west vent area right through there. So interesting, those zones. Some more dispersed further out, but zooming back out. Some over here, these are interesting because this is above that deeper reservoir area. Thought to be more or less in there. And then you see the connector over here going down a bend with you can see a little bit more of that natural dispersal in the earthquakes in time and space there. Right, but still showing the activation of that area. And then within the last week, not alarming, normal earthquakes like we hadn't had of recent levels. Still in the magnitude 2 ranges, 2.1 over there, and 2.5 under the south flank. So all pretty typical there, pretty quiet otherwise in a lower East Rift zone. Really no earthquakes that are showing up on this map, which has a higher threshold. So it's not picking up the tiny, 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 tiny ones. Still cool to see and pick it apart a little bit like this. So that's the past week, and once again the past month here, putting it all in context for you guys. All right, so that is close to the end of our Kilauea segment, and we'll take questions in Kilauea and say some thank yous at our break here. But one last thing before I wrap up Kilauea here is I did find this publication of a video of earthquakes from 1986 to, I want to say it goes to, what is that thing here, 1997. So 11 years of earthquakes. And I wanted to play this for you guys. It takes about 30 seconds or so. And it's showing where the earthquakes are occurring, but it's also coloring where they accumulate, right? The cumulative pattern of them over time. So you can see how we really have this feature on the Upper East Rift that's been active for quite some time. Right, and actually, and this time it extends a little further past there. It's interesting too. And those similar south flank areas being activated, right? That's typical of how there are certain patches that stick and generate earthquakes, and certain patches that don't seem to generate earthquakes, right? Maybe it can just slide through there more easily, and so that's an interesting thing to note as well. So the patterns we're seeing are typical of what's happened in the past, right? You can see that in this particular sequence, not nearly as much, a little hint of something in the southwest rift here, but not as much. And so that's something that's interesting to keep our eye on, that's visible in the signals today. So credit to the source of everything here is the USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And the most recent weekly update here is just to make sure we touch base on everything here. Was issued actually today. Same notice that was issued on Tuesday was reissued today as part of their monthly release. And no new SO2 measurement, but they are saying that the rates are consistent with that non-eruptive period still, based on recent gas survey. St. Louis field visit confirmed continued fumarole degassing and no changes at the crater floor. So no actual number, but we're getting reports of low values. GPS continue to show inflation. Some altimeters continue to record gradual inflation. Seismicity rates unchanged in the past week. The lake still completely solidified. No surface activity observed. East Rift Zone observations. Seismicity persisted along the upper East Rift Zone this past week. And together with geodetic monitoring, this suggests the summit and upper East Rift Zone continue to be replenished with magma. By contrast, the lower East Rift Zone was mostly quiet. So, the hazard analysis is something we've touched on before. The gases, may still be impacting people. Although as time goes on, it's something that you're either perhaps getting more used to, or it's decreasing in quantity. We'll have to check back on that. Hear back from you guys of how that's going out on Hawaiʻi Island after the eruption in 2018. All right, so that's Kīlauea, and before we switch to covering the rest of the island through Hawaii Tracker, including Maunaloa, our other volcanoes, as well as the fire, we will pause and say our thank yous, Dane.
All right. Well, let's first get out. We have a bunch of donations that have been come through hawaiitracker.com/support, so I want to acknowledge all of them. Mel S., James T., Elizabeth W., Jessica N., Troy B., Robert G., Katrin G., Judy P., Jana K., Timothy H., Craig L., Lori H., Robin M., and Linda H. We appreciate all of you. Really helps keep us going, continuing to provide this type of content. If you want to support us but don't have the means or don't really care to make a monetary donation, sharing this video, liking, subscribing, all helps us get this type of content out there a little bit more each time, and we really appreciate all the people that help us out in those regards. We do have a couple of sponsors that we want to acknowledge, as usual. Kaleo's Bar and Grill in the heart of Pahoa. So they got some unique twists on some very traditional dishes, as well as some little more local kind plates that you might be accustomed to if you live out here. And really good restaurant, good staff, indoor, outdoor dining, takeout of options, so COVID safe policies, all that kind of stuff. We really appreciate Kaleo's for continuing their support. And if you're in Pahoa, check them out. Really worth the time. Second sponsor is Kalani Tours out of Kona. They specialize in a couple different kinds of tours, mostly waterfall, volcano, and some Kona coffee farms. And they have some very intimate tour sizes instead of the big box style of tours where you all get on a giant shuttle bus. It's more intimate with the people, so you get a little bit better knowledge and rapport with the tour guides. So we appreciate their support as well. If you're coming out, definitely check them out for some quality tours. And we are brought to you by a grant by the Hawaii Community Foundation, the Puna Strong grant, and we appreciate their support as well. So with that, I think we can get into some questions, huh?
Yeah, let's do it.
First one is from Jennifer on Facebook, and she asks about the last 10 hours on Kilauea earthquake activity. Saying 42 earthquakes in 10 hours, and it's in a way more than we've been having. Do you think it's getting ready? This activity looks similar to before the December 2020 eruption to her. Just seeing what your thoughts are on the last, say, 12 hours or so on Kilauea.
Right. Well, so I can revert back to these graphs. I mean, these graphs do update, so we can look at this one, for example, even though it does say the past year. It does have a timestamp on here. This is current through 1 p.m. today. And so it was not quite live to now. Let's see if I can get it any sooner. No, that's the most recent time. And that one's not showing so much, but it's averaging the whole week, so maybe that's not good enough. So let's come into the past month here and make sure we reload that one. That one's also showing a 1 p.m. timestamp over here, and it's showing a little bit higher. Right, we're up to maybe 80 earthquakes today, and what did she say? 42 in 10 hours. So that's consistent, right? But if we look back at what was happening in that time period before the 2020 eruption here, we were coming up to over 800 or at least 700 earthquakes, let's call it, per week. That's 700 per week. That's an average of what, 100 a day or so. So yeah, I suppose 100 a day we're maybe getting there. If we were to get up to 100 and stay up at 100 for 3 weeks, then we'll replicate these kind of data points. And so that's where we are. So yeah, the thing is that when we've come up before, it's always been up and down and up and down and up and down, right? As you see here. So I think it's still wait and see. We have to. I personally need to see more earthquakes than this, but it does seem to come in spurts. Interesting that you mentioned that, Jennifer, since it does seem like sometimes it kind of flares off and then it seems to quiet down a little bit, and it flares off and quiets down. Maybe that's just the pattern of the Earth where it adjusts, and then it can adjusts by moving, and then it can adjust by deforming, and then it can adjust by moving, and then by deforming, or something like that. Yeah.
Right. All right. Good question. Bill on YouTube asks, on the map that we showed, the earthquakes that you just showed from the 80s to the early 90s in blue, what are the depths of the different clusters? Because you're discussing gaps and what conclusions you can draw based on the vertical gaps.
Okay, he wants to see the cross section. I'm gonna have to find that where that is here. I'm not sure I have that up.
That was the first time I've seen that map, and it was like watching like a hacker play asteroids or something like that, how fast those data points were coming out. It was like I hadn't seen that before. It was pretty interesting. Yeah,
okay, so let me here's the paper by Matosa, Okubo, and Shearer. This is 2020, right, where they've relocated all the high precision seismicity on the island from 86 to 2018, and they have besides the paper itself, right? The paper's got all kinds of different interesting things here. But so, for example, if we look at this area that we were just focused in on, Kilauea, right over here. Right, so here, everything projected onto this north-south axis. You can see a little bit of the pattern with depth here, 0 to 20, right? So you can see there is that south flank structure area right there. That's in that 8K range, something like that. And you also have stacked on top all the shallower volcanic system right through there. And this is kind of a zoomed in version, and this is a blown out version that goes down to 80K. So the blue ones are the deeper earthquakes there, right? So showing those deeper pathways, and maybe you can see a little bit of these deeper pathways that kind of accumulate in areas beneath the volcano. Right through there, and that's below all the shallow system. That's looking north to south. If we can cut it east to west as well, and that projects down over here. So here's that summit, deeper chamber area. Maybe I can zoom into it some more. Maybe I can't. Deeper chamber area right in there. That seismic southwest rift, the shallow southwest rift, the summit area, and the rift zones. Shallow structures and rift zones, the kind of shallower cracks and dikes in this upper part right through here. And then you see there is that south flank below it right through there, getting projected as well. So when you look at where the gaps are, right, the gaps are actually in that south flank lineation there and there to finally come around and answer your question, Bill. So there it is. And yeah, interesting patterns there.
Yeah, definitely. Bill asks, or sorry. Ron asks, how long will the gypsum and sulfur deposits on the Caldera walls remain visible?
Well, it's some mass balance between how much is coming out and whatever how it interacts with the atmosphere, whether it's dissolving into the atmosphere, which happens depending on certain conditions, or it's actually precipitating because there's actually a source of gas there. So it could last a while. It could last a long time, and that South Sulfur Bank was a feature for many decades in the 1800s before it was gradually buried in lava. And the sulfur banks up by the visitor center at Kilauea have been sulfurous for a long time as well too. So I mean, it could be decades potentially, right? It's really until something else changes it, until there's a new gas vent somewhere, or a new eruption that pours things out, or adjust the pathway of gas so that the next time it pours rain, it can start tipping the balance the other way where you don't see them anymore. Yeah,
Right.
I don't have a great answer, but thanks for the question, Ron.
Yeah, good question. Kimberly asks, you spoke briefly about harmonics a few weeks ago. Can you speak more about the harmonics in relation to earthquakes and possible volcanic activity?
Yeah, so I mean, it's briefly, you can have different patterns. We call any shaking of the earth an earthquake, right? But the earth can shake in different patterns and across different frequencies and all of that as well. So what you're looking for is more of a longer term or longer period vibration, almost, is what you're looking for. Like as a background level is what's changing, rather than discrete jolts of the earth around there, right? And that's often been attributed to the movement of fluids through pathways underground. So normally when you see these long period harmonic style type of earthquakes, they have to do with the movement of magma underground. So that's what you look for, and they don't always show up as earthquakes on the monitors, depending on what size they have, and whether they how much they're vibrating things around it. They could register as a magnitude 3 or 4 earthquake or something like that, But a lot of times they don't register at all if they're smaller, because it doesn't look like a typical earthquake pattern. So that's the typical earthquake as I think of it, and I describe it, right? And as opposed to harmonic, is the ground actually snapping, and so you see like a jolt and a quick dissipation of all that energy across the area. Whereas you see a more constant movement through a pathway, then you see a more constant elevated background harmonic tremor, is how I would try to describe it today.
Right. I have a question from Barbara here. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. How confident are geologists on the modeling of the underground plumbing systems of Kilauea?
Well, I mean, it's science, and science is meant to be tested and improved upon and refined and all that, right? So, I think they're confident in their methods enough to share them. I don't think that any scientist typically thinks that their experiment was foolproof or has, it doesn't have its weaknesses. So I'm sure they would acknowledge their limitations to the methods that are being used, right? Where, we can use earthquakes now to see what's shaking, which areas are shaking, but this just doesn't tell us necessarily, as you said, whether they're shaking due to magma movement or due to flank movement, for example, just on this one plot that we were just looking at here. So it's really fascinating to consider that, right? And if you don't have a vibrational earthquake within a pathway, if the pathway is like a big area that magma can move through there without breaking anything or creating any significant vibration, you can really have a lack of seismicity. The seismicity doesn't give you the whole picture, right? You can have movement of magma without any seismicity either kind. So that we also have to rely on things like the tilt and the GPS and the gas emissions as a whole tool monitoring package, right? And not just look at the earthquakes.
Right. Well, that'll do it for the Kilauea question and answer segment. We will be doing one more. So if you want to submit questions on Maunaloa or the Mono Road brush fire, we'll try and take those at the end of the stream. So back to you, Phil.
All right. So yeah, we will switch here to Maunaloa and the rest of the island, starting with Maunaloa. And we'll look at the deformation data here, which I've already given it away is not that much different. You see the past weeks, just those daily normal variations, nothing alarming there. In the past month, you see really the background is not changing a whole lot. You really see that telesize on that big shaking of that earthquake. I believe that was the Alaska earthquake that spiked that tilt. So really no change of significance there. And then looking at the GPS as well, still not a whole lot of change. Maybe we're still ranging about the same, maybe slightly lower than we were a couple months ago, but overall it's very, very slowly changing, if at all, right, within an era there. So to put that in context of the last 5 years, right, it was coming up quite a bit. It paused in 2018 for Kilauea to take its turn, essentially, and then continued going up with several of these little adjustment events where it seems to adjust across the summit, perhaps the flank as well. And then this last time, now it's just something we haven't seen in the past 5 years, this real exact kind of pattern here. So really interesting, and I'm curious to see if this is something that will have modeling results shared at some point soon to tell us the most recent happenings with our bigger volcano here to Kilauea's north. Right, to the vertical, not a whole lot of change as well. Maybe a slight dip, if anything, there, but very, very minor when you consider the scale here. So
pretty flat in there.
Pretty
Still
flat.
Pretty flat. Yeah.
So we can try to microanalyze here the USGS report as we have been. This is the little bit of information we have. We have 39 small magnitude earthquakes below 2.5 beneath the summit upper flanks of Maunaloa, and still less than 5 miles below sea level. No change in UPS, no change in gas, no change in anything else, webcams, temperatures, nothing like that, right? So we can come back to this 39, and if 39 is in a little summit area, here's the last week of Mauna Loa, here's a little area we're measuring. This says 43, pretty close, different bucket of time, so maybe slightly more, right? But very, very small ones here on this upper south flank here. And a scattering elsewhere to the northwest. We've certainly seen a lot more to the northwest than this, so really focused mostly on this upper southeast flank, right, which is interesting, just in itself. So that's when we scroll down here to the rates and depths, you see it's really jerky. When it comes down to there was one day with nothing at all on the mountain, which is really weird, right? But still, 12 per day is not that many, and nothing alarming there. So looking at the last month to get a better long-term view, you see a little bit more of that northwest of the summit area active. You see a little bit more of the upper southwest rift zone flank area with those shallow earthquakes that are typical. You see still that upper south flank. It's really striking to me, Dane, today is like how few we actually have showing directly over the caldera itself, because there were some times in the last year or so that you really couldn't see this caldera shape at all on the map.
Right, and that was one of the things to me, because when I was looking at the historical earthquake patterns, it wasn't really dominant inside the caldera, but over the last couple years, it had been one of the primary areas for earthquake activity. So it going back to something like this doesn't look really unusual, to me at least. And again, it goes back to that talk of a few weeks ago, and we're like, all right, so what is the threshold to go back down to green, to degrade the warning level of Mauna Loa from yellow advisory to green normal background levels? When we were looking at that GPS plot, the point in which it was turned to green and during the 2018 eruption, it had more inflation than we're seeing currently on the same GPS plot, and it seems almost like we're going longer. The duration is longer as well, or it's looking to get that way if it's not already. So it's just interesting, again, back to what is green on Mauna Loa, what is
right.
Background levels, and it seems like Mauna Loa spends most of its time in the yellow.
Yeah, so really there's nothing alarming in Mauna Loa. That's the takeaway message here. It did some interesting things recently, but now it seems to be taking its time adjusting, right? And we'll have to wait a little longer to see what comes next. Mauna Loa just still sits there kind of idling in neutral, right? And here's an earthquake rates over the past year plot. Show you guys a little bit of how that varies, right? Sometimes, it's gone up, 200 earthquakes per week back and before September 2020. And again in March 2021, and again in May 2021, right? But really, or March and April, right? And really by May 2021, and since then we've been at this pretty low level of earthquakes per week. And keeping in mind that this plot is capturing just this rectangle, this square right here, around the summit area itself. And so we have in the past analyzed that USGS text for when he mentioned some amount of those being split out to the flank. So I can show you an updated version of that here. And really we're flat here on the right side. Flat here on the right side. It's that flank event that happened recently seems to have just died off. We've had previous ones like that before that have been mentioned, happen in clusters and don't really usually last more than 6 weeks or so. So After 5 weeks this past time, it seems like we're back to just the summit earthquakes being reported by the USGS. So flank adjustments continue, still cycling through that, but it hasn't gotten anywhere near to its failure point apparently. So it just keeps adjusting, and it seems like it's adjusted enough right now to what's been going on. So wait to see till those until we see that that's no longer the case, that it hasn't adjusted enough. So presumably magma's still going in there, so it's just a matter of time until we see something else change. But that is Maunaloa, and I did allude to this as well. As we make our way around the island, we'll start off with the volcanoes here. The USGS does put out a monthly update on other volcanoes here. So Waialae, no significant earthquakes, 4 small earthquakes less than 2.0. This is on par with previous months. And that's Waialae. And Haleakala on Maui is also part of the reported volcanoes here. So no significant activity, no earthquakes, and continually recording GPS showed no deformation. So a little peace of mind for anyone on Maui. It's very rare, but still no signs of anything changing there. Mauna Kea, no activity significant at Mauna Kea during the past month. They're noting 33 small magnitude earthquakes, all less than 2.5, most above 14 miles below sea level. So this month is higher than previous months because HVO has switched to more inclusive counting criteria. Under both new and old counting methods, there is no change in earthquake rate at Mauna Kea. No change in GPS either. So this is a good month to come and touch base, just to touch in and say, by the reports, 33 is going to be normal. And these small earthquakes that happen underneath Mauna Kea deep down, very, very small ones. So Loihi was quiet. No earthquakes, no significant activity. Right, there have been times that hasn't been the case. Loihi's still quiet, and that is our roundup of the other volcanoes around the island and further over in the state. So the big event this past week is what we'll switch to next year, and that's the Mana Road fire. I've pulled off some of the images from Hawaii Tracker here for you guys to see. So a view from Nicole Gribble, Hawaii Tracker on Facebook. Is a place that we try to share the community news as it comes in and a little bit more of the real time, right, after being able to vet it and all that. So what it'll look like there on August 1st on the horizon there from nearby areas, that brush fire coming across the landscape. And viewed from above, some images shared by Dane, Hawaii Tracker, from Paradise Helicopters and Bruce Amori. You can get a little bit better view of what this actually looked like, what kind of vegetation, what kind of brush we're talking about. A lot of grasslands through here. Right, you see the fire line coming through and a water bucket drop that's being documented here by this great partnership there. Right, so I won't spend too long on all this. We're not going to cover this comprehensively by any means. We're just going to try to show you guys a little bit of what's going on here. So another view in daytime of what that fire line actually looked like with the smoke blown over. They're from Christopher Lee Reed.
Right, and it was these photos really don't give a sense of scale because this fire was absolutely huge, especially for Hawaii standards. I think it's over 74 square miles, or roughly at 74 square miles. Just to give a sense of that size that we're talking about for this fire. It was a fast-moving brush fire, more than the forest fires that you might see on the mainland taking place right now, like the Dixie Fire. Just really driven by the winds was the main thing that helped spread this, with them gale force winds on that side of the island for a couple days there. Really whipped up that, and you can see it jump the road. The fire jumped the road, and that was a common occurrence on August 1st, when this fire jumped Highway 190 and started heading towards Waikoloa Village, which was then ordered into an evacuation. The village has roughly 6,500 people in it. So they had the main road going out of there absolutely jam-packed with traffic as the fire was descending upon the subdivision. And it got really close, the fire did. And it's you want to say like, oh, it was great work and teamwork that prevented the subdivision from going up, but not as much as we just got lucky. We really got lucky with how the winds changed and just a few things that went our way instead of against us, that if they did go against us, we might be having a very different conversation today.
Yeah, for sure. We're at the mercy of the wind, for sure. And if the wind hadn't died down, it might be a different story. Here's a view from Hawaiian Aerial Vision's drone view, looking northeast from Waikoloa, showing a little bit more of that extent. But you really don't see how far it extends into the horizon here. So I really have to show you guys some maps of this, right? And so I did find this post by Parker Ranch, right, which put up an update here with a map of their estimated acreage burned at 47,100-ish acres or so. And they say that at their count, something like 78% of the total fire area was on Parker Ranch lands.
Oof.
And that they estimate that something like 50% of their Mauna Kea lands are burned. Slightly more than 50% of their lands are burned. And that's 25% of their total lands under control and ownership of the Parker Ranch there. So they're still relocating all the cattle, assessing all the damages. They're saying so far, just the Parker Ranch, about $2 million in early stages of damages. A lot of fencing has been described as getting damaged by our local community, right? I've been listening to Councilman Tim Richards, especially, has been particularly good relaying info during this event to his community up there in Kohala. But there was also at least one residence lost, right? Officially, one residence lost. Dane, is that correct?
Two
lost.
Two that I know of. Yeah.
Yeah, there were some earlier.
They're both in Pu'u, Kapu.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure on that, but I know I think they were Hawaiian Homestead on Hawaiian Homestead lands.
Right.
Which is, that's rough. A lot of these guys, I think one of them, he got the piece of property from his father, and that, kind of had everything he had there and all gone. So
yeah, it's terrible.
Rough stories for those guys.
Yeah. Fires
got a lot worse too. Yeah.
Fires are really unforgiving. Really, they are. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's some that there's like almost nothing you can do. It feels like thinking back to the Paradise Fire in 2018 in Northern California. What are you gonna do? The thing's moving at like 40 miles an hour through the treetops. Like, there's nothing you do at that point. You're done. And it's just way too hot. Things like this, you need the elements to start playing in your favor. And we see that with the Dixie Fire that's going in Northern California right now. Sorry to go on tangents about fires, but the Dixie Fire there, they had a few days, the wind whipped it up and it was huge evacuation, and then the wind died down and the smoke sat on top of the fires and smothered them. So that happened for like 4 days. And the crews were able to go and do all these back burns and set up all these blockades. And then the wind kicked up and it just went through a valley, jumped the lines, and burnt down Greenville like yesterday. Like a town, entire town gone. And that's just the reality of these types, when fires get rough, when fires get really nasty, how they can behave. And you think you have them, you got containment, and then it just jumps over, it jumps a quarter mile or something and just reignites. And that's the craziness of these things.
Yeah, for sure. And some of the issue, of course, is having, less tolerant, alien grasses in the area rather than perhaps other kinds of vegetation. I don't know. We'll see if,
it even goes farther than that, because I'm told from a very reliable source that the homeowners associations on that side of the island mandate or require certain grasses to be planted around homes and stuff like that. And they're all just the most incendiary plant matter that you could place down. So there needs to be at least an information campaign being like, guys, let's not line the houses with things that are flammable. Let's do the opposite of that and start building those, doing like California ends up having to do, and building out where we have these barriers where fire can't burn through.
Right.
I think it's about that time.
Yeah, I have seen that there has been community initiatives of fire preparation and fire awareness and all that, in those communities for some time already. But having everyone do it 100% to the point where the fire doesn't start in the first place, that's hard when you have so many people, and that's really it. Most fires are started by people. We'll talk a little bit today about how really, because lava flows can start fires as well, but it really depends on other aspects of the climate. And you could have a lot of rain last year, leading to a really lush growth spurt for all the grasses, and then you have next year it's not so wet, and then everything is dry again, and now you have extra fuel to burn all of a sudden, and what you have one of these 1 in 50 or 50 years or more events, right? So this map is a little funny because north is actually pointing down that way, right? So we're looking at the mountain up here. Waimea is down here. Waikoloa is down over this way. So this is the view. And so here's the area where it was encroaching on residential areas before. Probably right. Maybe it's this area right here, where everything else was Parker Ranch lands that were affected there. So
right. And one of the things, just talking about lightning, and you were talking about the man-made, and that just made me think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of really any fires out here that come to mind that were caused by lightning. I can do that all the time on the mainland. There was maybe, you could say, argue half the fires that I grew up with were lightning started from dry lightning, but I can't think of that out here. They're mostly man-made, and this one, just for those that are curious, we're not exactly sure what happened. I have it on pretty good source that the fire was started this time because of a welder that was working on Mauna Road, welding on something, and sparks from that managed to cast the grass on fire, and then it spread from there. We'll have to wait for investigation and all that kind of formal stuff to really know exactly what happened, but that's what I'm hearing, at least, is sparks from a welder. And then it comes back to the thing that I grew up with Smokey Bear. Only you can prevent forest fires. And, it's really does come down to that individual level, because all it takes is one guy with a match to burn down, like a town, if the conditions are just right.
Yeah.
And that's the real, disaster of these crazy fires that we see nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we can be thankful that it was only 2 residences, but our hearts also go out to Parker Ranch, and we know for sure that there were some many head of cattle lost. They evacuated a lot, most of them, honestly. But there certainly were losses, and we'll hear about that in the future, I'm sure. So to take this area and give you guys a little bit more perspective of this here, let's put this in context. This is a capture from a county map that's posted on hawaiitracker.com. So you can see there, that's how it plots on the island and where it plots on the island, with Waikoloa Village being down here, with Waimea being up in here, right? And so here is the Pu'u Hawaiian homeland subdivision. It goes like that. That's that uppermost reaches of it, the most Mauka areas is where the burn came through. Right, so that's affected area. And to give you some perspective, right, Dane mentioned it was 74 square miles by an estimate. So put things in perspective, here's that Lower East Rift Zone eruption, 13.7 square miles, right? So that's hugely impactful, lasted a long time, but as far as just area, we can compare that fire in a much shorter time covered a much larger area, right? So that's one difference between the fire and this eruption. And the eruption, of course, set off fires within it, especially in the Kipuka through here, because it also was able to dry out all the grasses downwind of it and then prep them to be able to be ignited as well. So have like microclimates and eruptions, which is interesting as well. But by and large, though, that scale of thing is not the same here as what we saw with the fire this past week. So, and of course, if we go even further, look at the most recent 2020 eruption, we're only covering 112 acres, right? So it's barely anything, much smaller footprint there. Of course, it'll pad in a hole, and it's much thicker than any of the other areas, and we're not going to go into volumes or anything like that. But that's how that footprint actually fits. And one plot here that I pulled up on Google Earth, let me make it so you can hopefully see it all. Comparing the size of this fire, Mauna Road fire, to that 2018 eruption, and comparing that to the 2020 eruption here. So getting a rough idea of the size comparison over those 3 features there. So it's a whole different thing, right? It seems like in this context, volcanoes are easier to deal with, right? You see it coming for longer, right? But it does last longer, of course, as well, right? Here we are, the whole thing lasted 4 or 5 days altogether, not counting the still occasional flare-ups are happening now, right? That are still should be manageable to put out. So really interesting, right? Different timeline, different area covered. But the preparedness aspect has to be the same, right? If you don't have your stuff ready to go on a fire, especially, then there's no time to gather it, really, right? And so that's part of what we saw at the Waikoloa. In fact, was the evacuation of Waikoloa is due, in my opinion, just opinion here, and in part to the fact that there is limited road in and out through there, right? They did activate that back road that's not paved, right? But
Kula Street, I think.
Yeah,
but there was a backup of traffic trying to get out of there, and they ended up having to basically block off Queen K in order to just let people come down the hill from Waikoloa Village. And that's just one of those things. If the cards are stacked against you, the fire sweeps through the cars while they're still on the road and stuck in traffic, instead of playing nice and the fire playing nice and starting to back off. Just one of those things again. But it all, just for that size comparison that we were talking about, it always brings up the meme from 2018 where it's like what people think is happening on Hawaii Island, and it's like half the island is covered in lava, and then what is actually happening, and you can barely even see it on the map without zooming in, right? Because it's just, the island is that big. It's all the other islands could fit inside of it, twice or something like that. It's gigantic, and most of it's uninhabitable areas or uninhabited areas. And we see where the fire went a lot this time, but it came down and started threatening these inhabited areas. So it's just that interesting dynamic here on this island in particular.
Yeah, so it ended up being a good wake-up call, perhaps, for some people, or a good drill for others. Good exercise in preparedness and all that. Because Waikoloa Village was actually called to evacuate for several hours before that order was rescinded, as the winds died down and a fire was as the firefighters started making progress on a fire. Yeah.
Right, definitely. There is a comment saying that it was a grinder that threw the sparks. I've been hearing all kinds of different things, and they're all in that same little category of one dude with a tool working on something on Mono Road, sparks come, start the fire. Not exactly sure what the tool was, but yeah, that's it's same scenario with all of them. Right.
Is there anything else you'd like to say on the fire, Dane, before we transition to some of the Kilauea research and Volcano Watch this week?
I think that's good for now. On the fire.
Yeah.
Into it pretty deep.
Yeah, there'll be more coverage on HawaiiTracker.com. If you guys are into it more, you can go look for other kind of details. I think we'll leave it at that for now today. It does connect a little bit because the Volcano Watch this week from USGS, this week entitled "Spaceborne Sentinel Keeps Watch Over Hawaiian Volcanoes," references the GOES 17 satellite here that was looking down and is monitoring the island for temperature changes, and actually caught the brush fire beginning here and alerted all the HVO staff as a test of their alert system, right? So if that had happened over the volcano, we would have known, and they would have all been alerted by phone. That all went as planned. In this case, it happened to be something that was not an eruption. So great practice as well from that point of view there. So fascinating tie-in here from USGS, for them to say that was a good practice run, and give them a chance to talk about the GOES satellite here and resolution and all of that, and of course, once they saw one image, let's say you wanted to make sure that wasn't an eruption in Mauna Kea, you can go to the Mauna Kea monitors and look at the Mauna Kea GPS and Mauna Kea, et cetera, and as we just mentioned today, everything is all normal there, and so that was all quickly determined and on from there. Right, so that's the one connection into the fire here. But while we're looking at USGS and affiliated research here, we're going to cover the article that was published covering volcanic tremor and information at Kilauea. AGU here published a couple of days ago. So this actually covers 2 studies. One study that discusses that's by Subester et al. And they are actually using tiltmeter, and they're describing occurrence of tremor on a volcano, and occurs in a couple of places. And so let me just show you guys here. Volcanic tremor, and let's come down and pick you guys an image to show you guys. That's not a good one here, like this. So what they were finding was that, come on, here we go. Disappeared. Technical issues. Okay, here we go. Nope. This is not going to let me zoom in on it, fortunately. Okay, well, leave it like that. So this area southwest of the Caldera here was showing this persistent tremor that they're attributing to the hydrothermal system. So they actually saw something before the eruption where this was activated, and it was essentially showing more tremor, perhaps because you have more magma close to the surface. Maybe the temperatures are going up, or the fluids are, something like that, right? I'll have to get more details in paper and share with you guys. But it's that part. It's essentially that hydrothermal system that's in the shallow area. That's what they see before the eruption. That's one signal they see. The second one they see is during the eruption. They see that same area reacting to what they interpret to being I'll read it for you guys here. The injection jerky motions of a cylindrical rock piston with a radius of 300 meters, height of 250 meters, and that mass, 2 times 10^11 kilograms, progressively intruding 12.3 meters into the shallow hydrothermal system, and it gives its volume and depth as well, right? So it's basically saying that as the Caldera collapse was happening, as some rocks were going into the hydrothermal system, it was changing the way that they were vibrating, and they were able to detect that. So they were able to show how it was vibrating beforehand at an increased rate due to the build up to the eruption, and then afterwards as well, as the eruption was happening, as that piston of rock was getting jammed into it, and eventually got in at 12 meters or so, right? So that's the tremor aspect of it there, right? There's another part of it that they're saying that there's another signal of a fluid-filled crack, magma underneath Hale Mau in a dike that trends east-west, kind of thing. And what they're saying, without going through all the details of the models in great detail here, is that they model that to be a magma-filled crack that's progressively decreasing in gas amount, and that by May 26th, they think that the magma was completely degassed in that area and no longer responding in that seismic tremor kind of way. Right. So, interesting that as we saw in that first phase of collapse eruptions, collapse explosions, it seemed like there was some gas being released from the magma in those initial pulses, right? And now we're seeing some evidence, perhaps because it's a modeling result, right? But it's consistent with, until May 26th, having gas to expel from that crack and from that magma body underground, and then afterwards having it not showing the same properties because it's lost a good amount of its gas. So that's interesting to see as well. That's one aspect of the tremor, and that's something goes back to whose question was it that asked Kimberly's question about harmonics, different kind of harmonics here. And in this case, it could be hydrothermal fluids or the actual magma in the crack vibrating from during the collapses or between the collapses. And without getting lost in the details, we'll leave it at that. So the second article that they talk about focuses on what happens after the 2018 eruption. And this is by Wang et al. And they're using INSAR and GPS. And essentially the important thing that they're describing there is that they were simultaneously seeing what was it here? Inflation in the northwest side of the caldera by the shallow reservoir, and deflation in the southeast side by the deep South Caldera reservoir, right there. So that's the interesting thing. You can actually have 2 different reservoirs, and it's more likely that you have 2 existing if you see them doing different things at the same time. And that was one key aspect of this observation of this study here by this group. The other thing is that they actually can use those measurements to try to. They also are trying to model this underground, and they're testing in particular the connection of that shallow Halemaumau reservoir to the East Rift Zone compared to having a deep South Caldera reservoir connection to the East Rift Zone. And they come to the conclusion that it's consistent with and actually requires a connection between that Halemaumau shallow chamber and the East Rift Zone, right? So that's a question we've had for a while, had during eruption. How does that connection actually work? And they actually say that if there was flow through that deeper part of it as well, it was at some ratio of 10-1 through the shallow area is what's required by their modeling of the data. So not to say that there isn't a deep pathway as well, right? That seems likely that there is. And connections of all different types, we'll call them, right? Including some that are more active and can accommodate more volume than others, as is indicated here in this most recent study by Wang et al. Here. Wang, Zhang, Overenti, and Segal. Well, Segal being the senior researcher here. And all that, yeah. So a couple other things, they say that the upper reservoir is actually prolate at a depth of 2.2 kilometers. Prolate means kind of taller than that is fat, right? But kind of like a cylindrical oval, right? That's the oblate, prolate, and then the oblate, the South Caldera reservoir being shorter and squatter, and deeper down at 3.6 kilometers. All that's consistent with everything that we've heard before of other models and studies, and so that's reassuring to know that all is consistent there. So we'll leave the research at that without going into any more details. We don't have the full papers available to share with you guys publicly. But we do have, from USGS, to wrap things up here, they do have a recent publication index put out here, kind of indexing a lot of the recent stuff that's been synthesized and made available. So the lava lake from 2018, and in 4 different chapters here. Including chronology, the old photographs, bubble bursting, groundwater, all things we've touched on in separate bonus segments as well. Publication about human possible influence on lower East Rift Zone activity, and essentially there is no consistent, no evidence to support human influence in a volcano on that report there, but they go through all the different lines of evidence and show the interesting data there. There is hazards that was put out prior to the 2018 eruption. There is a summary of the Maunaloa 1880-81 lava flow that came to Hilo. There is the details of a workshop between the scientists and cultural practitioners conversing with Pelehonuamea. So where they made a point to discuss with each other their interpretations of whether it be stories or geology, the science of it. That's interesting as well. We can maybe dive into that in the future. And then a lot of other data if you're, a research scientist here, GPS, DEMs, LiDAR, temperature measurements, gas data, groundwater chemistry, gravity data, water level, and water chemistry data, strontium isotope ratios of not just Kīlauea, Maunaloa, Loihi as well, repeat microgravity data. We have the historic events of 2018, special issue in volcanology, the UAS video of the summit, the UAS video of the Lower East Rift, the geometry of Pu'u, volcanic plume heights, high resolution earthquake catalogs, spectroscopy data here during the Rift Eruption 2018, geospatial database, whole rock and class chemistry, tilt data, cyclic effusion data, pulses and surges. All things we've covered in various levels of detail, and this is obviously why there's a lot for us to keep us going. As you guys are asking what we do when there's not an eruption, we just try to keep up and share all this other science and knowledge because we know it's coming again at some point, and so all will be relevant, right? Ash, and all of that too. So
that thing is amazing for Control F, the search function, to find certain phrases or words in the document, because you just quick links to whatever you need. Like, oh, I want the tilt from this one specific tilt meter in the 2018 eruption, and you type like 2 words and boom, there's the link.
Yeah.
Right? And you're downloading it. Like it's great for us. For like I really appreciate it. I don't know how much many people are going to get out of it, but I think it's awesome.
You can find that straight on the HVO homepage right there. If you just scroll all the way down, let's see if it'll let me scroll all the way down, if I'm going to be stuck with this. This is not the best map interface here. Let's see if I can, maybe if I, there we go. Then you can see under the news section here, Volcano Watch, and then here, summary of recent publication and data. Right, so a link right there. So that is what we have today here, and we can take our last set of questions for discussion, right? Never saying we have all the answers to everything, but we can talk about it and, give you our ideas and hear your ideas if you happen to contribute as well, and carry it forward that way.
Yeah, definitely. We do have a couple questions here. We'll go through those first. Tim asked, was this about the Mauna Road fire? Was this the largest wildfire in the islands in recorded history?
That's tough to answer, right? But
yeah, it's going to be close. It's going to be close. We can say that much. If it's not the largest, it's going to be the second.
Right.
It's right at that where we got to figure out exactly how big it is, how many acres it is, and that'll probably happen after the damage assessment and stuff like that. And when that's all figured out, then maybe it's close though. And we're still at 95% containment, so it's not out yet. So it's still getting a little bit bigger each day, but yeah, it's going to be close.
Yeah, I imagine once it's all the way contained, or now that we're close, and we wait for a few satellite passes to come over and hope for some clear weather, you can get some pretty accurate maps that way of the actual area. But it's going to take that happening and then comparing it to what we have shown here as, the credit to the tweet by Cray, I'm not sure I can say his name, Trowernicht, perhaps. Right? And he's pointing out this 1969 Pu'u Anahulu fire that was 47,974 acres. And so we saw the Parker Ranch estimate of 47,100. I've seen 50,000 as a rough estimate. We'll have to wait for the final map to actually see. It's going to be close, like Dane said here. But
and one thing just to note is Hawaii County and the state does not have the sophistication of something like NorCal fire, where and especially the resources and the practice, right? This type of fire on Hawaii is like, wow, we got to go back to the 70s to find something that big. We have fires, but not something that big. California, it's like in Plumas County, the Dixie fire is big, but it's just the one of 3 huge fires that have engulfed the county over the past 1 year only 1 year, and then half of the county, without exaggerating, has burnt. Right, so it's just incredible to that step up. But what they do in areas where they have to do that kind of like NorCal, it's the mapping would have been completely done 12 hours after they place the order, type of thing, to get it done. It's efficiency unlike any other.
Yeah, more akin to the USGS flying, giving us daily thermal maps of the eruption, right? Like daily mapping. Right. So it's more like a real time. Here's what it is now, and here's what it is now, and here's what you keep doing that over and over and over until it's over, right? So yeah, interesting.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to point out is that Volcano Watch title. It was confusing for me. I can't. Let me see if I have it up. At least it made me do a double take. A spaceborne sentinel keeps watch over Hawaii volcanoes. I was like, what? Sentinel 1 and 2 are over Hawaii volcanoes? Because those are actual... Sentinel is another satellite name, right? Sentinel 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, Sentinel system. Oh, wait, we're talking about GOES west? Oh, wow.
Yeah. The Sentinel is the one that's giving us our INSAR, right? Over Hawaii. No, not the only one, but yeah, that one of them.
Yeah, definitely. Final question here, I believe. Satellite monitoring, Denise asks this. Satellite monitoring is amazing, especially for the volcanoes that don't have much ground monitoring. How do you think that could be used? Maybe not in Hawaii, since we have the most actively monitored volcanoes on the planet. What about like Alaska or Iceland or anywhere else that's remote.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think Hawaii does play a role because it's not everywhere that you can set up a network that's as comprehensive as what you have here in Hawaii, right? So what you can do is you could correlate one data set of on the ground measurements to that space-based measurement, and then you have a calibration so that when you see some other space measurement in Alaska, wherever you're looking at, whether it's in Africa or wherever you don't have the resources to actually deploy people and quickly, and they can get there easily, right? That you can use that kind of method and approximate what the magnitude of changes on the ground based on what you see from the satellites.
Right.
Right.
We got one last question here from Bill, who asks, does the study of tremors tend to support the existence of what you call the Southeast Connector on Kilauea?
Yeah, so we talked about that a little bit. It's been 3 weeks now, maybe, where we talked about the evolution of that part of the East Rift Zone, Upper East Rift Zone, right? How it seemed like in the mid-early 60s it was a lot less connected, and the pattern of earthquakes and the pattern of stress there was much more so that it was still wiggling its way through to establish a better connected system. And then after the Pu'u, sometime during a Pu'u eruption, likely early on, it became much better connected. The stress field changed, and it certainly became much more, perhaps eroded, right? Like it's better connected as the magma flowed through there. It probably wore off some of those sharper edges and areas where you could pinch points. So that by 2021, it seems to be recent research published as now also showing earthquakes elevated during summit inflation times of Kilauea. So it's essentially now become a part of that upper chamber, and that upper connector is something we talked about its origin in detail last week. We probably will clip that and re-release it as a separate standalone at some point. But if you can't wait, you can jump back to last week's live, and that last hour is that presentation about this whole Southeast Rift. East Rift connector, the Southwest Rift, and the Kauai Fault Zone all together. There.
We'll get a stream highlight of that put together. Was going to do that over the weekend, and then fires started. But that reminds me, we do have a Drones On to premiere immediately after this live stream. It's on the June 4th and 5th of the 2018 Kilauea eruption. It's kind of the heaviest days of the eruption for many, as hundreds of homes are destroyed in 24 hours as the ocean entry takes place in Kapoho through the coastal community. And there's footage that hasn't really been seen before, guys on the ground inside Kapoho, which is totally isolated by the lava. Not totally, almost entirely isolated. You're not getting there on a road, or you're not getting there on foot at that point in the eruption. But there's guys going in on boats, like Akaika, who we join up with a little bit as he makes a trip to Kapoho on June 5th. So yeah, check that out. Only 10 minutes long, and some really heavy footage in this one.
Yeah, mahalo Dan for putting that together. I look forward to that this week. So anything else before we sign off here and rejoin with you guys next week?
I think that's all for me. We'll pass it to you and let you close it out.
Yeah, mahalo Dan. Yeah, it's the fire certainly took that extra effort. Yes. So that's just how it is, right? And otherwise, we'll appreciate the relative quiet in the volcanoes for now. Even though a lot of people are excited to see what happens next, we can wait a little more and put out the fires, literally, in the meantime. And until then, we'll just keep on streaming, the documenting and recording the patterns here for you guys, to hopefully understand how these things work and help our preparedness for when volcanoes come to our communities as well. So that's really our ultimate mission, is to help people by understanding what the volcanoes are doing, but also to drive that curiosity and that science, and maybe some of that a little bit as well too. So mahalo you guys for joining us. Thanks for all the questions. Thanks for all you guys that supported us. Until next week, for Hawaii Tracker, he is Dane DuPont. I am Philip Ong. Aloha, everyone.